Hello everyone and welcome back to Floki's Models. Going to be building the cockpit and HGW belts for Eduard's 148 F6F Hellcat. Going to start by removing some details to use the Eduard Space 3D decals later on. Using a number 11 hobby blade, I scrape off the details on the top of the panel and the switches on the lower back part. And a few swipes with a sanding stick makes them good enough for the 3D decals later. Since you can see behind the pilot's seat through the side windows, I decided to make me some bracing using some square 1mm styrene to start. I cut two pieces at the exact same size. I glue this to the sidewalls using styrene Tack 2. I line it up to a pencil mark that I made earlier off camera. Double checking my measurements. For the top part of the bracing, I'm using a scrap piece of sheet styrene cut to the same dimensions as the back of the pilot's seat armor. I drill a small hole, then start to gradually enlarge it with a bigger and bigger bits. This piece is then glued into place with more styrene Tack 2. I then line it up in the fuselage. Now to make the lower portion. I made a cardboard template first, then transferred that over to some sheet styrene and cut it out. I glue this in place, again using the styrene Tack 2. Make sure it's lined up correctly. Then using more of that 1mm square stock, I make the middle section of the bracing. I do end up cutting off the excess hanging out the bottom later. Now to head over to the spray booth. To start, I will be using Tamiya X18 Semi-Gloss Black to paint the seat and the floor of the cockpit. I was out of gloss, but the semi-gloss worked just as good for this. Next color in the airbrush was Alclad II Aluminum. Again, the seat and the cockpit floor was painted with this color. I then decanted some hairspray to be able to spray it through my airbrush, and I gave the seat and the cockpit floor 2 even coats of this. Next color in the airbrush was Mr. Color 351, mixed 1:1 with Mr. Leveling Thinner. Again, the pilot's seat and cockpit floor was sprayed with this color, along with the instrument panel, the rudder pedals, control stick, side panels, and the fuselage sides. The next color was Mr. Color 13 Neutral Gray, again mixed 1:1 with Mr. Leveling Thinner. Everything behind the pilot's seat would have been gray, so I masked off the front and sprayed the rear this color. This wire will be used for the bracing later. It was base coated with VMS metal primer before it was sprayed the neutral gray. Now for the hairspray chipping. For this, just some tap water and an old brush is used to reactivate the hairspray and chip it from the areas that I want it at. How the floor turned out. And the pilot's seat was chipped in the exact same way. And how the pilot's seat turned out. Now to add the 3D decals to the cockpit. To start, just dunk them in some water for about 30 seconds and set them aside for about a minute to loosen up on the backing paper. This is what I have left of my old bottle of Future Floor Polish. It works great for tiny photo etch and to hold these decals in place. And here's the finished instrument panel. Again, I used Future to lock all these into place. And the finished side panel. Since these operated off of aircraft carriers, they wouldn't be a bunch of mud or sand being drug into them, so I'm just doing a pin wash of MIG dark wash around all the details. Now to start on the HGW belts. It's a lot easier to thread the belts through the buckles where they are still attached to the PE fret. Just remove one side of the buckle from the fret and keep the other side attached. A drop of VMS 5K Flexi CA glue works great for holding these belts into place. While building, don't forget to separate the belts from the backing paper. And again, just a little bit of this black CA glue is enough to hold these into place. This is the pull strap for one of the buckles. And this is the hardest part of the entire build of these, and that is looping two pieces of belt through one buckle. But the finished belts are worth it in the end, and to me, worth all this trouble. The shoulder harnesses are built up in a very similar way. And when they are complete, I glue them in place on the seat using Bob Smith Industries Extra Thick MaxiCure CA glue. And here is the finished belts connected to the seat. Again, well worth all the headache to me. Now to assemble the cockpit. First, the sidewalls are glued in place using styrene tacket 2, and I glue these from the bottom and run just a bead down the side. The opposite side panel is glued in place the same way. The control stick is added. Then the cockpit subassembly is glued into place on the fuselage using Tamiya Extra Thin. Now for the bracing that can be seen attached to the back of the cockpit through the window. These are glued into place with Bob Smith Industries Extra Thick CA glue. Again, not accurate at all, but at least something can be seen through these side windows now, and I'm glad I took the time to make them. And the last step is to close the fuselage up, but we'll look more into that next time. Thank you all so much for watching, and let me know down in the comments what you thought of the build so far. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet, it would really help me out. And like the video if you really did like it. And again, everyone, just stay tuned for many more builds to come.